team. Our intent this year is to offer a variety of research to practice opportunities that span the K-12 spectrum. Teams will receive a review of a specific evidence-based practice or practices, fidelity tools to support your implementation, the opportunity to formally evaluate the impact that you're having on student outcomes, and then be provided with an opportunity to share your experiences and outcomes with your peers in different regions across the state. So over the course of the 22-23 academic school year, we have been addressing topics like class-wide reading intervention, class-wide math intervention, tier 3 problem solving, response to intervention, secondary writing and reading, leveraging evidence-based practices and principles within a UDL MTSS framework. That's quite a marriage if you haven't heard about that one. And last but not least, formative assessment. So for our teams who complete a given research to practice experience, that means you all here, if you come back the next time after a period of implementation, which is about 8, 9, 10 weeks, depending on the given opportunity, you'll receive a digital badge for your efforts and commitment to enhancing student outcomes. So we want to thank you again for joining today and for everything that you do as educators. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Pam Kastner, and she's going to introduce our presenter for today. Pam, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Collins. It is such an honor to introduce Dr. Lena Edwards-Santoro to you. Lena Edwards-Santoro is a research professor with the Wheelock College of Education and Human Development at Boston University. She leads national center work, including the Lead for Literacy Center, focused on supporting technical assistance and the dissemination of evidence-based practices. In addition, Dr. Santoro works on projects related to the development of instructional interventions for students with literacy-related disabilities. Her research emphasizes literacy instruction for struggling readers and writers with a specific interest in supporting student development of oral and written language skills, vocabulary, and comprehension. She is a former special education teacher, and she has been a long-term partner with Patton. We are recording this session, and the live transcript can be enabled. And with that, I am turning it over to Dr. Lena Edwards-Santoro.
Thank you so much, Pam, for the introduction, and good morning, everybody. I'm just thrilled to be with you today to talk about core reading strategy instruction. So I'm going to open up the PowerPoint and share a little bit about how we will run the session logistically, and then we'll get right into some of the content. So let me get started right now, and hopefully you'll be able to see my screen share in just a moment. Here we go. I think we're set. So we're going to get started with a focus on core reading strategy instruction. This series and this session specifically has come out of development work in the multi-tier systems of support for writing that has been part of part of Patton's efforts to improve evidence-based practice and use with students in terms of core reading and writing instruction. So I just want to acknowledge the colleagues that have been part of this work, and that I really get to stand on shoulders and present that to you today. So I'm just wanted to have that acknowledgement. In terms of your materials, I want you to look for and access the following in the Google Drive that Patton will share with you. The first is the PowerPoint. So you'll be able to navigate as I present through the materials, excuse me. And also, I want you to be able to come back to this PowerPoint as if it were a chapter or a resource on its own. I set up the PowerPoint presentation in a way where the sections are all in parallel. So there's a little bit on assessment, there's a little bit on intervention, and then I'll show you some examples related to fidelity and implementation. So lots of resources just within the PowerPoint itself. Also note that I'm sharing a resource packet today. That resource packet is a PDF file, and when you see instructional examples presented in the PowerPoint, I've provided those to you in the resource packet, and that might be a more readily accessible way for you to get some of the instructional examples and actually take them to use. So note that resource packet. One of the things we'll be discussing today is the integration and connection between writing and reading when we get to core reading strategy instruction at the secondary level. So I want you to be able to think about reading through the lens of writing. And to be able to do that, one of the ways that we can assess student reading outcomes is through a writing sample. And part of scoring that writing sample is to really have a good analytic rubric or tool that you can use to get information about student writing performance. My recommended analytic rubric comes from Smarter Balanced, and I've given you access to that in the materials, and I'll talk more about why and what that looks like as we move through the training today. Finally, one of your outcomes, as Jen Collins mentioned, will be to come back to a part 2 session and share implementation. We're so hoping, and I'm so hoping, you will find things in this session that you can take and that you can implement and put to good use in the next few months, and then return to present and share your work. So to make it easier for you, we've set up a team presentation template that's essentially ready to go. And all you have to do is drop in the information from your implementation. And so I'll conclude the session by doing a walkthrough of that template, but you have that as a separate PowerPoint file, so ready to go and to use as part of a follow-up presentation. An important tool that I want to call out and just to make sure you know that you have are sets of fidelity implementation checklists. Essentially, these are checklists that align with the important ingredients of instruction that I'll be talking about today. And so those are embedded in the PowerPoint. And so when you decide to implement something from this session, know that there is a corresponding fidelity checklist that you can use to guide that implementation. And so I'll point those out to you. I'll call them out as we move through the content today. In terms of participation, I really want to leverage your chat box. That, I think, will be the primary way that we dialogue together. I will maybe prompt you to think about a response. You can enter that response in the chat box. You can ask questions via the chat. And I'll pause periodically throughout the session to check in with my Pat colleagues to see if there are any questions that have come up in the interim of my presentation. And so just really use that. If you have a reflection or you want to echo or provide additional voice to something that's been said or shared, please enter that in the chat box, and we can use that to communicate. It enhances the session, I think, with that dialogue. My Pat colleagues will also be inserting some web links and resource links for you as I present today in that chat box as well. I might just like see if Annotate works today with you and ask you to do some annotation on the screen. Essentially, we can give it a try. Annotate, how do you find your Annotate features? You hover or move your cursor, at least for me, and I see someone's experimenting, which I'm very happy. That's great. You hover your cursor around the top of your screen and the toolbar should appear. Annotate is one of the choices. Once you select Annotate, a drop-down menu will occur, and then you can find stamps, which is probably the mode that I'm going to ask you to respond with. You can pick check mark, heart, star, for example, and then when you hit enter or select with your mouse, that will appear on the screen. And so we'll give it a go, but it does not prevent you from being able to respond to anything via the chat. So if you don't want to use Annotate, it doesn't work for you, no problem. We'll be able to use the chat box to dialogue. The other thing coming up are breakouts. We want you to have some team time today to be able to talk about implementation. And so that team time will just give you, 7 to 10-ish minutes to review some of the content that was presented and to help your team decide next steps. No worries if you're not here with a team. We'll set up a breakout room for you to meet others who are also not here with a team, and you all can love you to talk about your experience with some of this content and applications within that setting with that group. I imagine we're going to have about 2 to 3 breakouts today, interspersed throughout the presentation. Again, housekeeping. Today, as you know, November 15th, and we're focused on core reading strategy instruction. Our follow-up for this session will be occurring on January 11th. So we have a part 2 for this session occurring on January 11th. And I want to be very clear that that part 2 is not set up as a traditional webinar. It will not take the format of today. It will rely on your team presentations on implementation. So at the conclusion of this session, I'm hoping you'll see some small piece that you can walk away and play with and experiment and try to implement in a school setting, in a classroom setting, and then return to tell us about it in January. It'll make for a really rich conversation together. So for that January 11th session, I guess I would say, ticket in the door is that team presentation. So returning to be ready to put your cameras on, to dialogue about what works and what doesn't in terms of classroom practice, and really engage in conversation. So today is a little bit traditional. January 11th, it will be very engaging, and we want that active participation. So I'm setting expectations up for that return session on January 11th. Overall, you'll see that these 2 sessions on core reading instruction come within a series. Jen mentioned some of those sessions, and they're just listed here as well for your information. All right, housekeeping done. So let's now focus on the content for today. What I want to really look at is putting core reading strategy instruction in context. So meaning I want to place that in the context of multi-tiered systems of support and talk about how we are framing evidence-based practices. The second thing, what will be important as we move through strategies is linking assessment with instruction. And the way that I want to focus on that little introduction of linking assessment with instruction is through the lens of writing. So I want to make sure that you feel comfortable implementing writing assessment with students. Then we'll move into the instructional strategies. That will be the bulk content of today. We're going to focus on 2 main things: helping students understand the words they read and helping them understand the content that they read. And within those sections, this is where I said there'd be a standard way that that content is organized. We'll begin with a little background knowledge in each section, talk about assessment again, more specifically apply to what we're looking at. Then I'll preview and do an overview of some strategies that are aligned with evidence-based practices, and then finally end that section with some resources that you can use, as well as a implementation plan if you are interested in addressing student needs in that particular area. So as I said, the PowerPoint is detailed and focused on giving you resources to go. So I'm not going to present slide by slide. I will choose chunks of content based on your interest and needs, as well as making sure I give a holistic overview of all of this today. And you will have the rest of the resources to go. So finally, we'll end with implementation, and I will walk through your presentation template. So how things will all come together at the end. Outcomes today: assessing and monitoring student progress and written expression, and yes, reading, because we're talking about core reading. I want you to score student writing samples with an analytic rubric, and I will also talk about a detailed way to score with a measurable component focused on vocabulary. We're going to identify some core reading instructional strategies, and I will then end with that implementation piece where you will look at effective and explicit instruction pertaining to one of the areas that I've covered. So let's just jump in and set the context to get on the same page. So within a secondary system, what we're talking about today is core ELA instruction for students. So your core English language arts instruction. We're looking at instruction from the perspective of, does it meet the writing and reading needs of all students? And is what you're implemented with fidelity? In terms of where these practices come from, so as Jen Collins mentioned, this is an evidence-based practices series. And so we are pulling and discussing practices that you can implement within your existing instruction. I'll also share some things that if you are here and you need to really adopt a program, I will give you some suggestions about what might align with the areas that I'm talking about. In some cases, it makes sense to adopt and look at a new program. But really, overall, broadly speaking, what is shared today are practices. So instructional practices can be integrated, they can be enhancing what you're currently doing. They're things you can walk out the door now and consider. And they come from our research. So our research in education is the hard boots on the ground work where we go into classrooms and actually study how a practice is implemented and what the effects might be. There are two, I think, very preeminent, very important ways that these practices, this research, this foundational research has been summarized. On the left-hand side of the screen, the Carnegie Corporation has summarized evidence-based practices in their Reading Next, Writing Next, and Writing to Read report. These are great documents. They can be used in the context of a professional learning community, but they give you the overview of what works, what we're summarizing in terms of what works. Institute of Education Sciences on the right-hand side does something similar. They are very systematic about how they review research and what bubbles up to consideration in terms of having evidence to support its implementation and practice. So there's 3 guides that relate to this particular session: the Improving Adolescent Literacy Practice Guide, the Providing Reading Interventions for Students in Grades 4 Practice Guides, and Teaching Secondary Students to Write Effectively Practice Guide. You'll notice that in terms of dates, we're spanning what, like 2004 to current March 2022 as being most recent. Research and education advances, but it's slow advancement. So what we're seeing in reports from the Reading Next report, for example, back in 2004, or Writing Next in 2007, still hold up in terms of what is effective for students. So these are great source documents, and I want you to be aware of them and know that they are the foundation for what I'm sharing here, and they can be used within the context of professional learning communities. So let me just take the 3 primary ones that I think drive this session. The first are recommendations for improving adolescent literacy. I'll give you a moment to read the 5 standout recommendations from this practice guide. We're looking at providing explicit vocabulary instruction to our adolescent readers. We're doing direct and explicit comprehension strategy instruction, opportunities for extended discussion of text, helping support student motivation engagement, and making available intensive individualized intervention. I want just you to think about these. Of the 5, what is being done well? Of the 5, what is really the standout, would you say, that you observe in your school or district or team, with your team? What's fully implemented? What do you feel is strongest? And so look at those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can put that in the, I'd love you to just respond and put your observation in the chat box. What do you think is working very well for adolescent literacy of these 5 things? What do you see as, if you had to pick one, what's the top? Explicit and systematic vocabulary instruction, direct and explicit comprehension, providing opportunities for extended discussion. So what's kind of rising to the top that's working? And I'm going to watch a lot of number 3s are working. A lot of discussion I'm seeing so far, 3 and 4. Motivation. I'm happy about number 4. That's wonderful. Some of you are sharing that. Great. So 3, 4, 5. Oh, I see a 2 and a 3. Good. So someone's in there with the explicit comprehension strategy instruction in addition to extended discussion. So I'm just going to pause and let you get those responses in. And then I've got to say pause, stop. So don't enter because I want now to pull something different. Of these 5, what would you say is partially implemented, or maybe not really as much in terms of what you see? Which one would you rank as the lowest? And you can start those responses to the lowest. Yeah, explicit vocabulary instruction for many, 1 and 2. And I'm going to infer it's going to be that because we had a lot of 3, 4s and some 5s come in before. So the trend would be 1 and 2. That's what I'm seeing. You're great, everybody. Yeah, I wanted to have you kind of reflect on this and have your response come in, because this is something you can actually take some time and do with your team. These are the overall recommendations for improving adolescent literacy. You can consider, are they fully implemented, partially implemented, not in place and needs work? And from that perspective, this will guide you to a potential intervention to select and try, or an area to enhance in terms of next steps for improving practice. So let me turn to the next IAES practice guide. This is the newest practice guide. This specifically focuses on the struggling readers in grades 4 through 9. So we're picking up, I know today's 5, we're looking at grades 5 through 10 today. So this is getting right in that range. And this is for the most struggling readers. So take a look and read this. These are interventions, again, for the most struggling readers. And so I'd like to do something similar, but just wait, I will recap. So notice this, for adolescent literacy, broadly speaking, we were looking at explicit and systematic vocabulary and comprehension instruction with layers of, importance of having students talk about text and engage. Here we're looking at a layer of struggling readers where we need to help support their word learning. Number 1, building students' decoding skills so they can read complex multisyllabic words. Relatedly, helping them build that fluency to read effortlessly. So they're looking at decoding skills of multisyllabic words and then practice that reading. So that reading is applied to text they can read and practice with fluency. Comprehension, yes, but in this case, we're looking at comprehension building practices to help students make sense of text. And then finally, providing students with opportunities to practice making sense of challenging text that will expose them to complex ideas and information. Number 4 is, you got to remember, this practice guide focused on struggling readers. And it's saying to us that a good practice is to give those students access to challenging text and to teach them how to engage with it, to break up those ideas into smaller chunks of information. How do we do it? And it provides examples within the practice guide. So of this list of 4, again, same pattern, what do you think for your struggling readers is happening? I would say partially implemented to fully implement. What would your top be of this list? 1, 2, 3, or 4? What do you see sort of happening well of this list? 1, 2, 3, or 4? You're welcome to put that in the chat. Great, everybody. So I'm glad kids are getting meaning from text. So a lot of 3s I see. Good. So Indiana, thank you. Indiana Area School District 1 and 2 is happening for their, it looks like their middle school, the 8th grade there. Threes and fours here. So comprehension building practices is working well. It's wonderful. And so I'm going to predict in the inverse, maybe where we might have need is 1 and 2, building students decoding skills. But you tell me. So put a pause on your response. What is the area of most need here? 1 and 2. Or you tell me. You tell me what is the area of most need? What is either partially or really not implemented? Yeah. Really digging into those reading skills. Yeah, for sure. And so it is. I'm glad you're telling me that, because I think that's one of the pieces we will look at today. Yeah, great, everybody. Thank you. So, well, last one, practice guide from the Carnegie Corporation. And here's where I'm going to take things today. Hold this thought. At the secondary level, to help students read about text, they have to learn to write about text. Fundamentally, when we get to secondary and we want students to learn something, whether it is from their fiction or nonfiction book selection, we need to have them engage with that text through some level of written expression. And so looking at these effective practices, we have a first one here where we're having students write about the text they read, just as an ongoing routine. And here's some of the ways that they might do that as examples under 1. You could respond to a text in writing, like a short personal reaction, writing a summary, writing notes about the text, asking questions, answering questions of the text in writing. So that defines what number 1 is. So then the second is we teach students the writing skills and the processes that go into creating text. And then the third is just we're like paying attention to how much students write about text, and we're trying to increase that. We're just from wherever our baseline is, we're working hard to see where students, to help students write more about those texts. So same thing. I'm curious, of these 3, there's only 3 responses here. Which one would you rank as most effective at this point in time? Meaning, which practice is maybe partially to more fully implemented at this part in time? 1, 2, or 3? Great. So you are having students write about text they read. Fabulous. Good, good, good. And I did see a 3 there. So with a focus on increasing how much students write about text. Fabulous. Great. You all are very encouraging. You make my day this morning. Good. Also, let's put a pause. Now help identify of the 3, which might be not in place or come kind of somewhere between not in place to partially in place. And you can begin those responses. Mrs. Baker said it too, and Brandy also 2, teaching students the writing skills, that go into creating text. Great. Well, thank you for your responses. You can keep those coming. And I think it's helpful to me to see where to have emphasis in the presentation and how to talk to you about the content we share. Again, the purpose for this is to show you the foundational information that supports what we're talking about in the this session, but the other patent sessions in our series. And it's a great way for you to audit and think about practices, right? From this perspective, take the effective practices from these reports and practice guides, and then self-assess. Are they fully implemented, partially implemented, not in place? It's a great way to work to align instruction. So today's big idea, and I'm glad you are all sitting on number 1 from the Carnegie report about having students write about the text they read. That is so central to core reading instruction. Core reading instruction relies on having students write about the text they read. And the whole idea is to demonstrate comprehension. And so we will be working with this idea, but we're going to break it down under the consideration of struggling readers. So how do you have a struggling reader write about the text they read? That's really what we're looking at in terms of core reading instruction. And all of this requires some depth of content engagement. When I say content today, what I'm thinking about is what the text is, right? What the context of the text is and what it's communicating. And so that content is the substance. It doesn't matter if it's a literature text, right? A literature piece or something students are reading in social studies or science or other content. That is your content. And it requires this engagement where students are constantly asking questions to drive their understanding of the text. They're looking for examples and details. They want to understand what the text says, but what they think about it. Also constantly engaging and deducing and inferring what they're learning, which is an inference. So all this here in terms of content engagement is your thinking, and that's guided by print. It is your thinking about thinking, and it's your reading to learn. It's all of it. And so our goal of core reading and writing instruction is to help students derive content from that text for the purpose of doing something with it, for the purpose of demonstrating their understanding. And their understanding requires this detailed textual analysis, this interaction with the text, this content engagement to be able to understand. So I want you to take in this graphic. I put this together based on William Van Cleve's work. And I think it gives you a really nice overview of how in core reading and writing instruction, we need to move from reading the text to writing about the text. And I'm going to put my own annotate feature on right here, and I'm going to kind of mark it up a little bit. So we're going to look over here at the reading text piece. So when I read the text, here are the things that I want students to really work on and pay attention to. I want them to, first off, I want them to read. And when they are reading, here's the important piece. I want them to understand the words they read. But pause there for a moment. And I think you all really helped shine a light on this. Students can't understand the words they read unless they have access to them, right? Through decoding. And once they decode it, that word has to make sense or have some meaning to them. So this important piece of understanding the words is really a bigger piece to the puzzle we're going to look at. Then they have to understand the content itself. So finding main idea and details. Really from here to here is all about finding the gist and finding the essence of what that text is about and marking it up in a way for them to really get at that understanding. Finally, in the reading text is writing a summary. So when I say writing a summary as I'm reading, that doesn't mean I'm taking a minute and coming over to write a full summary of the text. What I'm doing is I'm writing a sentence level summary, or I'm writing a gist statement, or I'm filling out a summary advanced organizer with the information. This write a summary when reading is different than what's occurring in this column over here. This column, writing about the text, is something I do after I read. This is something on the left-hand side I am doing while I'm reading. And to do that, I'm asking questions and just fully engaging. So let me clear up my drawings here so you can see the full graphic. We're going to stick on the far right and talk about reading the text today and all the components required for that core reading strategy instruction. But notice that once we get that, students have at their fingertips in writing the things that they need to do to write about the text. They have what they need to do a TDA. They have what they need to be able to do a more advanced summary of the text. They have what they need to, in the middle column, to do a report. So this reading about the text thing is really important. And I want you to, with me, unpack all the skills that go into that. So then students can write about the text fully, and then they'll have preloaded in our reading about the text, far left, we preload, we are pre-teaching what is required for edit and revising. So just hold that. What we do in the far left box of this screen, which is the focus of today's session, far left box, is essentially pre-teaching, preloading what students need to do when they edit and they revise. It's all connected. So why so important is connecting the reading, writing at the core reading level for secondary students. You're in advance up front teaching some of those edit revise skills through your reading instruction. And that's really important. Sorry about that. I'm still on my annotate. So let me just stop. Here we go. So now, let's unpack this a little bit. This is what I'll be using to guide the session in more detail. On the far left is considering how students interact with content from an understanding the words perspective. And on the far right, we have understanding the content. So don't respond in any way right now. I just want you to think about that. Just want you to think about it. Are your students, your struggling readers, where are they getting caught? Are they getting caught at the word level, understanding the words? Are they getting caught at understanding content? I said both. I understand it's probably a little of everything. Could be both. But let's just take the understanding words piece and draw that down with me. So look in that far left box. When students have difficulty understanding the words, they are having trouble reading the words with accuracy and fluency. They're probably having difficulty identifying the parts of longer words in their multisyllabic words, and then connecting the words or the word parts to some level of meaning. Part of that understanding words difficulty might be in their expressive ability to use those words in speech or in their writing. So thinking about where your main challenge is with most of your students, is it there with understanding words? Look on the right-hand side. Let's break down understanding the content. Now, notice how reading and writing are interacting for these different buckets. So for the first main idea identification, students who have difficulty when they're reading, they don't understand the text. So they're reading it and they may have the word knowledge, but they're really not putting the pieces together to have meaning. They can't get at the main idea. They're losing detail. So you'll get half information of maybe some, but it's not thorough. They have difficulty putting their thinking into their own words. I'll say that again. Students might have difficulty putting their own thinking into their own words. They're just relying on what the text says. If they can't take that into their own words, that means they're really not having under baseline understanding at a main idea level of what that text says. And they're not using notes to study what the text says, so you can kind of get a sense of it. Now, think about your students' writing. If you have students who write without focus, they don't write with a singular controlling point, right? Their writing is disorganized. They have difficulty on the back end highlighting and note-taking during the edit revise process. You're having students who are still struggling with main idea identification within reading. So reading main idea and summarizing are two sides of the same coin, which we'll talk about a little bit. So one of the things I want you to know is that those things work together, but summarizing is the true expression and to be able to communicate main idea in detail. And so the difference we really look with summarizing is in the writing, and that's why that's starred. So students who don't summarize have the same kind of problems in their writing, but it goes a little further. Same idea of focus, not having focus, same idea of losing a main controlling point. They might have difficulty with a general organizational structure in their writing. They don't write introductions and conclusions well, because those are summaries, right? Those are summaries. They would also have difficulty communicating to a peer edit revise feedback, because that requires summary, right, to share back. So these two things, evidenced here by that dotted line between main idea identification and summarizing, are interconnected. Summarizing is more of the expression. So you might have students who have kind of a main idea in place, but their expression of it at the summary level is still emerging. And then finally, on the far right, I think we take for granted how important question asking and answering is in core reading instruction. And so look at that one with me. Look at that. In reading, how I ask and answer questions determines the depth of my comprehension. Main idea and detail is sort of your literal comprehension. If I'm not asking good questions, I don't get at that depth. Question asking also helps me connect ideas and discuss them. It helps me expand my ideas, because if I have an idea and then someone asks me a question about it, I'm able to expand my idea. It helps me conduct inquiry. And it helps me link multiple sources. Finally, in writing, what happens? If I have content that is stilted in my writing, I have kids who just write like basic, their content isn't very, it's not elaborated. Well, those are the kids who haven't really mastered question asking and answering. They're not using questions to help prompt them when they're writing. They're not using those questions to help them generate ideas or connect ideas, expand ideas. And so their writing is very narrow. They'll get low content scores because they haven't developed internal author's voice where there's questioning. Author's voice requires questioning. Questions drive how you cite and use evidence. So if you are having kids who can't cite sources or can't cite evidence, that's a question and asking answer issue. Integrating multiple sources, you get the sense of it. So I had a couple people, I think, anticipate what I was going to ask you to do over here with their stars on the far left. But let me clear the annotations just a second. But what I want you to do right now, if you can, use the stamp tool, annotate, and I want you to put a stamp on, a star or a check mark on the area of most need for your students. Where do you see the most need, the primary need right now for your students? Where is that? And you're welcome to annotate right on the screen here. And then the second thing, if you can't do it, please respond in the chat. You can still participate. Please respond in the chat. I'll watch that as well. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Where's the most need? Main idea. So, yeah, thank you. Great. So visually here, we've got a lot of main idea. Yeah, having focus in their writing, connected to main idea. It's interesting. Summarizing is coming up more in the chat than it is on the screen here. I see a good number of a good handful here with a question asking and answering too. Understanding content. So really, though, main idea and detail is interesting to me. And it's so fundamental, right? It's so fundamental. Kids are having difficulty understanding that text. Understanding with main idea and then understanding the text with depth. So I think you're looking at the the comment that just came in from that group here is main idea, and then using the question and asking and answering to go beyond that main idea to develop the depth. Yeah, where you're going to get depth is through question asking and answering. Yeah, good. Thanks, everyone. Yeah. This is helpful. Focus. Yeah, having focus. But I don't know if I don't have a main idea, I don't have focus. So good. So I'll just give you a couple seconds here to log responses. Yeah, and it depends on the skills. Thanks, Indiana. I agree. Depends on the skills and who the students are. So as we work through this today, you can, yeah, continue to unpack that and sort that. It does. I think we probably, and in a way that I'm seeing it visually, we've got across the board. I think we've got responses truly represented across all of these categories. And so I appreciate that insight. And I think it's reflected by this activity here, your responses right here. So I'm going to clear the drawings. And so hold your responses right now. You're welcome to keep the chat going if you'd like, but I'm going to just move through the introduction here and just say a little bit about linking assessment and instruction, and then we're going to get into the intervention piece. So one of the ways back that I will move forward with this content is that I see my content today in our webinar together as essentially having 4 modules. One module, and this is where we'll start, is helping students understand the words, and that includes helping them read the words. Then they actually maybe 3 modules. Then the other module is on main idea identification and its complement summarizing. And then the final module is question asking and answering. And I want to cover each a little, as you saw the responses, we have them scattered across areas of need. So we'll cover it. And then we'll end with an implementation plan that aligns with each of these. So think of them as chapters or modules as we go through this content. One of the things that I want to say from an assessment perspective here, we're going to use writing samples to gain insight into how our instruction is working. And a writing sample can be used across all four of those areas I showed you. And so when we're thinking about our model, we're always going to say, and I asked you, what's the problem? Where are students having the most difficulty? You're going to identify that. And then we're going to help monitor students and determine any potential growth. I think writing is a powerful way to reveal what's happening in your core ELA or your core reading instruction. And so what we're going to, you'll always see writing as an assessment option for all these areas, whether or not you're teaching students to understand the words they read, or whether you are trying to help them understand content better. Writing will reveal the growth that you're targeting. And so I think as a step one, if you don't have this in place already, I'm suggesting that you start to get into the routine of doing some writing prompts for students, maybe monthly, right? Have students practice writing to a prompt. They can plan for about a minute, then you're going to time their writing, and then you're going to score their writing with what's called an analytic rubric. Typically, analytic rubrics are broad strokes rubrics that are getting at some of these pieces. Look, quality writing has focus, organization, content, style, and use of conventions. Always. Quality writing just has these things: focus, organization, content, style, and conventions. And it's a way for you to look at insight. How does it connect to reading? Focus, I just alluded to, is main idea and detail. If kids don't have a sense of main idea and detail, their writing won't be focused. If they don't have that idea of being able to ask questions and answer questions and extend their content for depth, then they won't have substantive content in their writing. How do I know if students aren't using the vocabulary I'm teaching them, right? They're not going to have style. Conventions will be impacted. So you really can gain a lot from a student writing sample as we are in the secondary world. I love the Smarter Balance rubric. It was recommended to us by a lead researcher in the area of writing, Gary Troya, as part of the writing project that I referenced very early when I wanted to acknowledge that others have thought about this work too. And so this Smarter Balance rubric, instead of having 5 domains to score, it has 3 domains to score. The examples you see on the screen is for grades 6 through 11. It is an example of a rubric aligned with informative explanatory writing, so an informational nonfiction writing piece. And look, purpose and organization is one domain, evidence and elaboration is one domain, and conventions in one domain. So instead of 5 domains, our Smarter Balance rubric has 3 domains you're looking at. And essentially those 5 ingredients on the left-hand side, focus, content, organization, style, and conventions, are all there in the analytic rubric, all there in Smarter Balance. It just has collapsed the categories. So focus and organization are collapsed into a domain called organization and purpose, and content and style are collapsed into a domain called evidence and elaboration, and then conventions is your conventions. It stayed. So it's a really interesting rubric to use, and I want you to that can be a way you assess anyway in this world that we're talking about today. So let's get into the instructional strategies. I'm going to work through this Understand the Words module with you. This is the module or chapter in the presentation that will be unpacking the far left of my map that we were looking at. Understand the words. When students don't know how to read the words, they don't know how to connect what they read to meaning, and they don't know how to use the words in context, meaning in their spoken language, or put that word in their writing. So we're going to do a little bit on this. The way I've organized it, I'll give you a little bit of background to set it up. We'll look at some instruction, the intervention examples, and then we will conclude with some implementation suggestions. Oh, we'll talk about assessment as well. I'm sorry about that. We will also address that. So here we are. We've now in this first chapter in this module here, our problem or need is word reading. Right? It's understanding the words. And that's because students are having trouble reading the words. They can't understand what they read because they can't read the words. So we're going to connect these 2 pieces here in the continuous improvement process from our problem to what we're going to do about it. And so here we are on this map. We're focused on understanding the words. We're just taking that little piece, and that's what I'm going to drive. So to understand the words, requires 2 important components: word learning and word learning strategies. So we're going to take a perspective of explicit systematic instruction, and that requires learning both words as well as strategies to learn words. The other thing to pay attention to in helping students with core reading strategy instruction is at what level do they know the words? And that's what's represented here. Are they just understanding words at a single association level, that's synonym? Or are they able to really use that word in some limited context, right? Classifying the word with other words, mapping that word, categorizing that word. Finally, where you really want to push students, particularly if you want them to own and use those words in their writing and in their speech, is the generation processing, right? Being able to restate a definition in their own words, be able to put that word in their writing. It's where you really want to go with it. So I said, we're going to look at this core reading strategy instruction through the lens of writing today. That essentially means we're teaching vocabulary explicitly, and it requires students to use the words, repeat the word, right? To share the word in a sentence as they're talking to a peer. This requires a lot of different things. I'll let you take a look and read the bullets. requires a lot of different things, both definitional and contextual knowledge. Meaning, yes, they need to know a student-friendly definition of the word. They also have to have a sense of how that fits into some kind of context. They'll understand it better, right? Multiple exposure to words, right? Or an authentic context. And this is so key. We really want kids to now understand how words work. So in later, when we talk about understanding the content, I want students to understand how content works. Here, we want students to understand how words work. And part of that is looking at multisyllabic words and the morphological patterns that are appearing in those words. We want students to look at lexical networks, so being able to build their mental map of words, how words fit together, and then this idea of having a strategy to learn words too, right? Okay, that's what we're kind of looking at. So for this chapter, for this module on understanding words, I want you to think about assessment up front. So if you are going to go practice or do an intervention, take this to the classroom. How do you know it's working? How do you know it's working? Here are a few examples, and some I'm going to show you, some I will just tell you about in summary here. One of the ways you can know that something is working is use of a maze assessment. I'll show you that one. I'll give you an example of that. A maze is used in several of our progress monitoring systems, data systems. Acadience has a maze example, Ames Web has a maze, Dibbles has a maze task. You can give a word reading or decoding measure, a word list reading task. I'm going to talk to you about that. On the writing side, I can look at a writing sample and score it with the Smarter Ballot rubric, total score. That'll get me a sense. True, it will, how kids are using words. I'm going to show you how to use vocabulary in a more detailed way, measurable components. And finally, something I won't give an example of, but want you to note, an analytic rubric is looking at writing from a broad perspective. I can drill down and I can have a rubric scored 0 to 5, 0 to 7, just on word use, just on vocabulary. When I drill down and have a domain that focuses so narrowly, like just on vocabulary with a broad kind of score, 0 to 4, 0 to 5, 6 or 7, and it details different levels of word use, that's called primary trait rubric. And they're out there. So you can look at a student writing sample and say, are the words we're teaching getting into writing? So let me give you a preview of some of these assessments that you can use to monitor whether or not word level reading instruction is working. So one is the maze. The maze looks like this. If you haven't seen it, it gives students fill in the blank opportunities to select a word, right, to make the sentence have some meaning, and it's often a time task. So have you ever had nothing to do? Sometimes when I have nothing to, and students would make the choice, do, can, so, I take a walk. I'm inferring something about student knowledge about how words work in a sentence, which requires reading accurately those words as well as understanding the meaning of those words. Maze taps into syntactical understanding. Maze taps into word knowledge, word meaning, and word reading accuracy, right? And so one of the things I really like, and this is a Lena Santoro kind of just my own little thing here, is you'll certainly get a maze score. You'll certainly get a maze score from the Acadience, Dibbles, Ames Web. But one of the things is you can detail and dig in and look at the maze responses from an error analysis. It is so syntactical and so connected to the kind of instruction you might be doing. This aligns perfectly if any of you are doing William Van Cleve level work. This would show student progress, for example, if you did a maze error analysis. But I can look, is the error the use of a noun? Is it use of pronoun, a verb? So back here, you can identify that's when what, that's the I kick stones. So that would be a part where students don't know who's doing the action, right? The I kicking the stones. And so I'm looking there at the pronoun use. If a kid didn't get the I correctly, I would mark that as an error here for pronoun use, which then I infer that students might do, are they reading that word accurately or inaccurately, or they don't know how that word works in the sentence. But maze is pretty powerful. And when adding a error analysis, I think it can make it interesting. So that's one way you can kind of monitor. Another, particularly if you are working with a group of students who are having difficulty at that word reading level, can monitor with a just a simple word reading assessment to determine areas of strength and need in phonics, for example, phonics word reading decoding. Core assessing reading multiple measures is a great source. It's a tool that you have to purchase. It's available at booksellers, Amazon included. The assessments in the core assessing reading multiple measures are aligned with secondary students. The grade bands aligned with the target of secondary we're talking about today. And so I think it's worth the investment because it includes a variety of assessments that can be used. Another is I've included, it's just a simple advanced word reading measure. It's generic. It gives you an idea of what error patterns students might be making and what areas of need you might have related to instruction. So just some on the reading side, right? Maze, and then just giving a word reading measure as you start your intervention, and then give it again as you are concluding your intervention. Did students make gains? That's what we're talking about. So now let's turn to student writing, a way you can assess. One of the things I said was that you can score a writing sample with your analytic rubric and get a total score. Another way you can do, particularly because we're going to be talking about word reading here, is that you can get into that student writing sample and do some counting and determining the number and variety of words that students are using within the first 50 to 100 words. You can also do some counting of how mature the writing is. So for example, I can look at the number of words with 7 or more letters. Why 7 or more letters? Why 7 or more letters? Just think about it for a minute, and then I'm going to answer. Why 7 or more? Why 7 or more letters? It's because our more advanced vocabulary, our multisyllabic word use, what we want to teach in our intervention for students to gain access to, are words that have 7 or more letters. You could change that to 5 or more. You certainly could if you're working with a student who's truly just emerging. But the idea is within a first 50 or 100 words written, you pick. You've got to be consistent about it, but you pick it. If I have a student who doesn't write a lot, I might pick 50 words. If I have a student writing more, I'd take the first 100. And then I'm going to look at variety of words and maturity of words. I'll show you. So here's a writing sample a student wrote. And I'm not going to count word by word, but trust me that this is about 100 word, give or take, writing sample. So we're going to take and do our calculations of this writing sample based on that 100 words written, 100 words, right? So in this, I have a student writing about Leonardo da Vinci. See, I think that Leonardo da Vinci would be a good guest. If he was alive, he would have a great influence on us because he could teach us some of his techniques and so forth. So vocabulary variety, I look at that 100 words and I just cross out words that repeat. And I know it does take time, it does. So you may not want to do this level of scoring on all students. You might want to just take 1 or 2 as a sample. But that sample could be an indication of your larger group, right? So I's repeated, thinks repeated, Leonardo and Da Vinci's repeated, and I just am looking for repeated words and I cross them out in that first 100 words. And then once I do that, I end up with this word list here. These are the unique words in this student sample. So out of 100 words written, 38 are unique. So you could say the sample had 38% unique words. I know you're going to ask me, is that good? Is that 38% good? Is that a good score? Measurable components are not norm referenced. They're inter-individual scores, meaning intrinsic to my student here. And so I actually look at the word use. I think it's pretty good. But if I were targeting this as an intervention on word use and vocabulary, I would want to see an increase in this score. I would want to see that and even improve beyond 38%. So essentially, this gives me a baseline for that individual student. If you do this with a whole class, you can certainly kind of norm within your class or school. You can get internal norms, but I think what we're talking about today is individual student. You just want to focus on the instruction so it improves the score. With vocabulary maturity, that was the other thing. So we looked at variety, looked at maturity. Now I'm just going through the student writing sample and I'm circling words. I want to find those 7 or more letter words. And so I've done that here. Ended up here. This is the list. Leonardo da Vinci was used twice, because was used twice. So out of this total, there's 10 mature words used out of 100 words, and it's 10% mature words. Again, this looks pretty good, I think. I really do. This student is using some pretty mature descriptive words. But if it was my intervention to improve it and to really get more in there out of the student, this would be my baseline. I would want to see improvement in this measurable component. So that's vocabulary assessment. Let me pause here and check in if there are questions so far, and then I'm going to do interventions. So just anything coming in, my patent colleagues. And I appreciate you all sharing those references in the chat for everybody.
Lena, there's nothing in the chat, but I'm just going to offer a question that folks might have or might not, but that is the frequency of assessment. And could we set up situations? I might be thinking to myself, wow, where would I build this in? What about the scoring, all that stuff? And could they set up a situation where it's not everyone in the class that needs to be assessed? It's a smaller sample of kids. And then secondly, with some of the options, could we set up a peer and or self-assessment situation so that kids see that they're improving over time? So if you could speak to that, and maybe you'll get to that. I just wanted to throw that out since we're the realm assessment here. Thank you.
I love that, Jen. No, absolutely. The way that I think about this is you would use this level of detailed scoring on a subsample. So Jen is absolutely right. I wouldn't score a class of 30 kids with vocabulary maturity, right, and word and diverse word use in this example here. Absolutely. So you would do a small number, and for out of the gate, I might just try it with a couple kids. So try it between now and when we return in January. Try it, just experiment with it, see how long it takes. Try it. But optimally, this level of scoring is intended for your select students who are receiving that intervention. And if you have a lot of students receiving that intervention, you're doing a subset. And that subset could inform you in general about how other students are performing. That was one. And then Jen's comment, you are working with secondary learners. This is a great opportunity for them to self-score. They could self-score and look for a number of words with 7 or more letters. And I think it's very powerful for them to do so. If they're self-scoring, that means you could also have them peer score. And so I think that's a great way to build an efficiency. So are there some programs, I see the question here, that are automating some of these counts in terms of yes. So I think you can even look at, I think even Word will give you a variety, it gives you some kind of score or count on related to the sophistication of vocabulary. So there's that. It's not exactly like how I'm showing you it counts, but it would be an automated score you could use. So I just, Word is so easy and Word has it built in. So there are ways that you can get at that kind of thing through some of the auto scoring available, programs available. So absolutely. And you could consider it the same type of scoring. Such a great question.
Lena, just one more comment about main idea being, a theme and a need.
Yes.
The Maze assessment in Intervention Central, I put the link in the chat.
Thank you.
Offers free Maze assessments. And so we have a whole group of people here who might be teaching different academic vocabulary across content areas, which would be ideal if everyone got involved here. But just to know that that's free, and then you can customize, from month to month. And just another indicator or suggestion about assessment, that writing is tricky. And so when you're looking for games, did these strategies that I tried work? Some of the assessments once every couple of weeks, others once a month. So when we think about Maze, for example, how do we know the comprehension is improving? We don't see gains on Maze measures every week. We do see them every 4 to 6 weeks. And it's not much. So if you look at that and you think, wow, my kids didn't make much of a gain on Maze, because it's a third of a word per minute per week or whatever it is, know that that's pretty spot on. The gains are small, but they're significant. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. That's right. And I think in general, given that I'm thinking of you walking out the door with an intervention today that you could implement between now and a return in January, I think it's essentially like you would be implementing these assessments monthly-ish. And that does align with the kind of growth Jen is referencing, right? Referencing related to what we would see in a writing, like on a writing rubric or here with the Maze. So yeah, great. Let me get back right over to the PowerPoint and show you some interventions, and then we'll inch closer to a breakout where you can start to digest a little bit of this together. So again, we're looking here at word learning strategies and also how students are word learning strategies for students related to writing instruction and reading and writing. And so we've talked about the assessment piece a little bit. Now let me just run the strategies. This would be your intervention. So these could be intervention options if you had the need of helping students understand words. And so the first is a basic, explicit, and systematic vocabulary routine. And I want you all to really note there's elegance in the simplicity of this, and there's power here in what you'll observe. I also want to bring you back to the responses that you shared early in this presentation, where I think many of you said this was a missing piece in the instruction that you have in place. So a powerful, explicit, and systematic vocabulary routine has 4 basic steps. It requires introducing the word, meaning the word is participation. Then we introduce the word's meaning, and I define participation. Participation means to demonstrate or to show that you're listening or to show that you're involved in something. Illustrating that word with examples, and then checking a student's understanding. So that's where I probe by asking questions to discern whether or not students know the meaning of that word. Did they get did they have some basic understanding of it? It's posing questions, it's examples and non-examples, prompting students to use the word on their own and use it in a sentence. The most I think masterful demonstration of this strategy is Anita Archer. I know many of you know her, I've seen her. So this will be a treat for you to see some of her instruction again. For those of you who are newly introduced to Anita Archer, she is a masterful teacher and will really take you through an example, I think a gold star example of what this routine is like when we are trying to introduce and teach the meaning of words. So I'm going to flip over to her video right now and give you a chance to really look at her instruction. Here we go.
So looking up here, so we're going to expand on some of our vocabulary words, and the first word is what, everyone? Discard. And part of speech, it is a verb. And read the definition. If you discard something, you get rid of it because you no longer want it or need it. Okay, so when I get rid of something and I throw it away, another word for that is what, everyone? Discard. In fact, the synonym is what, everyone? Throw away. So if I clean up this room, as you two did this morning, you cleaned it up, and they found some paper and some pencils that needed to be thrown away. They did what, everyone? They discarded them. Hey, and so looking here, and read it with me, everyone, and starting here. What are some things that you should discard? Okay, and so everybody be thinking for a moment of your bedroom and some things that you need to discard. And begin by saying what, everyone? I should discard. My turn first. So I have a basement that is just filled with old books that no one wants. It's filled with overhead transparencies that teachers don't use. I need to, what, everyone? Discard them. I have cards. Every card that's been sent to me, I'm 64, every card that's been sent to me since I was like 5 years old, I have kept. And I have boxes and boxes of them, and I probably should discard them. Okay, and so first ones, then twos. Tell your partner something that you should discard and start with, I should discard. First ones, then twos, and go.
Mm-hmm. I should discard old papers.
Absolutely.
I should discard my clothes that I don't use and give it to charity.
Excellent. Okay, looking up here, and big voice your sentence.
I should discard my clothes that I don't use to charity.
Excellent. So you're not going to just throw them away. You're going to discard them, get rid of them, but they're going to go to charity. Excellent. Okay, well, looking here. And again, it's the word what, everyone? Discard. And read it with me. Brainstorm with your partner what might be discarded in a landfill. And continue. Count the number of ideals that you list. Okay, my turn first. So things that could be discarded in a landfill. Food that is rotten, old papers, a toaster that's broken might be discarded in a landfill. Old letters, old cards, clothes that are all ripped up. Okay. Looking with your partner and count as you go, say as many as you can, things that might be discarded in a landfill, and go.
So I think you've got the idea here. Please in the chat, respond with your observations of that video. What did you see about that instruction related to vocabulary? I think Dr. Anita Archer provides an excellent example of explicit and systematic vocabulary routine. So just note observations in the chat. Thank you. Yeah, constant repeat and explanation. So many examples. She kept the students' attention, continued to bring them back. Students were reading and understanding the word. They got to practice it. Yeah, a lot of you are noting the repetition here. Love the all respond. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, so many great examples. Yeah, Tara's saying first she's always going to her model. Perfect. And she's getting kids to pronounce the word. They're reading, right? Reading and using those words in expressive use. So a lot of advantages, but that's it. So if there is a weakness in terms of your audit, right, on what effective practices are being used, this one in and of itself, I don't want to say that we're going to stop the show right now, but this would be something to come back to and to be able to to use as a potential intervention moving forward, just simply introducing that explicit and systematic routine. And this would be your fidelity checklist here. You're introducing the word, introducing the word's meaning, illustrating it with examples, checking for student understanding, all those things that were included there. Now let's go to the word learning strategies themselves. Essentially, with our core reading instruction, we want students to be able to look at words and analyze at a word level, just as we want kids to analyze at a text level. We want students to be able to understand how words work and how letters, sounds, and patterns of sounds can be used to decode a word. That's word analysis. I think of it in parallel: word analysis, textual analysis. Word analysis, we're looking at the letter sounds and patterns of sounds to decode words. Textual analysis for content understanding is to look at how the text is working. And for multisyllabic words, we are trying to help support our secondary learners with morphological processing. That's the understanding of the units of meaning in a word. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in a word, and we want students to understand what base words work, how they are free or bound, different types of affixes, right, prefix and suffixes. We want students to start to understand and do some word study about how English spellings have evolved, how they keep morphological meaning intact, right, over phonological representation sometimes. And so we are really getting into this level of word analysis or word study. I'd like to think of morphological processing in this level of work with kids as something called structural analysis. It means that when we manipulate these small parts of a word for meaning, they change the meaning of a word. And it's fun to have students start to clue in on this and to manipulate words to change meaning, as well as understanding how these parts work. So with little guys, just think about it. When I add an S, for example, to a VCE word, I am changing its meaning from singular to plural. And by making something plural, there's more of it. It absolutely changes the entire meaning of what you're reading. So these little differences are really important. So let's now look at some instruction related to that multisyllabic word reading part. We looked at vocabulary and getting the meaning from words. And now let's dig into a different strategy where we're helping students identify word parts and start to read those word parts, right? So we're looking at words from a word analysis perspective. And this classroom example will take you through so you can see how words can be segmented into decodable parts, how students can be guided to read those parts, how we can examine affixes, right? And look to see how they contribute to how a word is structured. And then what we do when we're decoding at this level of word parts, right? These small units of meaning in a word, how we can use that to pronounce a word. Proper pronunciation of a word, proper reading of that word can help trigger meaning of that word. So it's real important for students to practice reading and practice reading those words correctly. I'm going to take you to Dr. Anita Archer again to show you an example of what that routine looks like. And so let me just bring up that video clip here and we'll take a look at it. This is called, by the way, pronunciation of words. So she's not doing the instruction of the prefix and what this prefix means and how to identify it. That has already occurred. Students already know that that's a prefix, or they know that that's a word part. This is just showing you the breakdown of how you can read multisyllabic words and pronounce them. And again, it's real good explicit and systematic instruction. So here we go on this example.
We have already learned some background information, so we have an idea of the time, place, and what was happening. And we are going to look at some words. Now, some of these you know right away, but I just want to be certain we have the correct pronunciation. So we're going to actually read these words by part. And pencils down, you're not going to write any of these down. I'm going to move my finger underneath the part, and you're going to read it, then the next part, the next, and then the word. So everybody, what part? In, next part, next part, And the word is intention. Excellent. And first part? Next part? And say E. And next part? And Lee. Immediately. But we say what, everyone? Immediately. When we have to do it right now, it is done immediately. And first part? Next part? Next part? And the whole word. Reluctant. And first part? Next part? Next part? And the word is? Excellent. And first part? Last part is swayed. What part? Swayed. And again? Persuade. Oh, to really convince someone they should do it, you persuade them. And first part? Next part? And the last part is airy. Good. And say the whole word? Oh, just very plain. You are ordinary. Say the name here. And first name is E. Allude. Allude. The real way we pronounce it is allude. What do we say? Allude. And first part? And last part? And the word is jostle. Okay, so when you wrestle with someone, you jostle. Okay, and so everybody, what word? Tension?
Immediately, reluctant, plantation, persuade, ordinary, elude, jostle.
Perfect.
All right, same. So reactions, observations in the chat. What did you notice about the instruction you just observed? Helping students read and pronounce those long multisyllabic words. Yeah, yeah, thank you. You're noticing the engagement of students, even though these are very basic and tight kind of instructional routines, students are very engaged with them. Yeah, helping students recognize the parts they know, and that's the key. This is coming in to show you how students are reading those words after they've learned those words parts. Perfect. So let me kind of bounce back over to the PowerPoint and share a little bit more on the piece that's sort of missing, I think, here. And that's teaching students how to identify those word parts. There's a wonderful strategy for doing so. Sure. Are you all there? I had my Zoom message that my Zoom quit on me, but I see you, so I wasn't knocked out of the Zoom meeting or anything. Okay, right, Karen, I'm still here.
You are still here. We don't see your slideshow anymore.
Okay, all righty. Yes. Let's go back over here. That is the problem. All right. Here we go.
This has happened to me too, Lena. You're not alone.
Okay. Is that good there, Karen? You see my slide order view? We good? All right. So what was missing prior to that was being able to break down and teach students how to find those word parts. And there is basic instruction that chunks this for students. So you're actually teaching students to look for dis and circle it. Find, miss, and circle it. You've got circle of that. So the first is just the instruction of merely identifying the word parts in sentences and finding them and circling them. And then there's that application of looking at a word like discover. What word? Find the dis in that word and circle it. And the next part would be just seeing lists of words and finding the words that require identifying word parts. So now it's not just a word in isolation. We've got a few words in a word list, and students are taught now to expand their understanding and circle those words. Then you could teach students a strategy for identifying these longer words and word parts, very similar to what you observed in Anita Archer's instruction, but this is the backstory. This is the back end. So if I'm looking at a word like propeller, I'm teaching students to look for and circle the parts at the beginning and end of the word. Say what part, pro, what part, Next, I underline vowels so students know how to pronounce those vowels in the rest of the word. So if I underline the E and Pel, per pel, P-E-L is a consonant vowel consonant. So I'm pronouncing that E as a short E, pel. What sound, eh? And now I can put the parts together and you're looping under each word. So essentially, this is what occurred prior to the instruction that you just saw. It really breaks down the strategy. I'm going to come back here and land on this. This is what we just observed. This would be, let's take this out the door. This would be your implementation look-fors in this case, if you're trying to help students read these longer multisyllabic words. And then finally, I'm not going to dwell too long on this because I think there's some resources available to you to explore some explicit and systematic morpheme instruction. And that would be looking at William Van Clee's work. He's presented a symposium called Morpheme Matters. And that is, I think, just showcases the depth of instruction that you can do with morphological awareness. And so you can see the part 1 of his routine when you introduce morphemes listed on this screen, and part 2 of his routine, where you really get into the depth of generating those for students and having students locate and underline the morphemes, sort of taking what I just showed you as a distilled strategy into much more depth. It's an excellent presentation, and it gives you that morphological piece in detail. So essentially, if you are game to go out the door today and help students understand words better, this would be your intervention plan. So from November, December, and your return in January, hopefully you could pick one of the interventions I just showcased, the explicit and systematic vocabulary routine, working on multisyllabic word reading, explicit and systematic, right? Either pronunciation or the strategy to identify word parts. Or if you've been trained by William or want to return to some of that explicit and systematic morpheme instruction presented in his Morphological Matters, Morpheme Matters series, you could do that. So you're picking one of those interventions and going out the door and trying it. You begin your intervention in November, you continue it through January. Your fidelity of implementation would be one of these tools. So let me get my annotate here. It would be, if you're doing explicit and systematic instruction, you would be using this tool. If you're using the word reading tool, you use the routine, you use the middle implementation checklist. And finally, if you're following William Van Clee's work and watch the webinar he did at Patton, there's your implementation look-fors there. And from assessment, we talked about that assessment plan. You don't necessarily have to assess in all of these areas using all of these measures, but finding something that you could use to give indication of your growth over time. Assessing somewhere at the end of November, early December, and then, I don't know, before you go on break in December, or when you're back in break in January would be your second assessment. We talked about maze. A word reading decoding list aligned with the words that you were actually teaching would be fabulous and would probably show the most growth. You can look at student writing, that vocabulary piece where we're scoring number of words with 7 or more letters or number of diverse words used would be great. So that gives you the assessment plan to follow if you are taking this path to implement something related to word learning. I just wanted to show you, yes, there are programs out there. There are programs that help support this idea of language and vocabulary development, looking at particularly vocabulary through morphemes or word generation, which some of you might have known or used. Also, oops, sorry, Zoom issues here. We're getting ready for a breakout soon, and I'll try to resolve my PowerPoint issues. So also programs related to supporting that word level reading relate to some spelling and word study, that word analysis I've been talking about. The one that that's highly aligned with the instruction I presented today is the rewards program by Anita Archer, Vicki Vachon. And that's listed at the very bottom. It's actually a program, so you don't have to design the instruction yourself. I mentioned William Van Cleve's presentation, Morphology Matters. It's available to you. He also did a similar presentation for the International Dyslexia Association. There's the rewards program, so you could see that. It's the one I featured in terms of a general strategy. So let's get ready for a breakout, and as you do that, I'll try to resolve my Zoom issues here. I want you to think about understanding words, and the kids who have trouble with word reading, word meaning. So two things you're really thinking about: helping support students with word reading and word meaning. And that far left column of our map for today. So meet with your team to discuss next steps with the understanding words implementation. What could you take away from what we just talked about for our secondary learners? Word meaning, word reading, word meaning on the word learning and word learning strategies piece. What are the takeaways? How can you apply this content? What are the areas of need? So essentially open discussion on what we've talked about so far. So I'm going to turn it to my patent colleagues to help us set up breakout rooms. I believe we've got things set up so you will have a choice to find your room related to your district. Ending the words meaning. Any highlights from your application, your discussion? Yeah, and Indiana is grappling with, I think, something we all do, and that's finding the time and leveraging it with fidelity. I think it is, right? It's always the time. I think the great thing about the Anita Archer vocabulary routine is that something that can be implemented and integrated. It's one of a great strategy that can be implemented into existing instruction, as Angela and her team talked about. So I love that connection. Yeah, also note any questions too that you may have come up in your group as well. I think we're right at perfect time here for a break, and so we'll use this as a transition point. You're welcome to keep observations coming in the chat, as well as any questions. When we return, I'll review just a brief bit on where we are in the flow of things. We've done one of the intervention modules, and I have, depending on how you count it, I have 2/3 to go. How you count main idea and summarization. So that's where we're heading next. So I have 10:17 here. I want to give you a full 15-minute break. So let's return at 10:32 and we'll pick up with understanding the content now that we looked at understanding the words. So I'll see you back in about 15 minutes. Enjoy the break. 10:32. A couple of you highlighted interest in that explicit and systematic vocabulary routine that Dr. Anita Archer presented. And I wanted just to reinforce that that's a very efficient, streamlined instructional routine. It's a pretty powerful intervention. I think in general, if you were to follow her process, it would take about 10 minutes to implement. So it's not an extensive, for example, 30-minute segment of instruction. It's intended, again, to be simple, direct, and integrated into what you're doing. So 10 minutes-ish to work through that routine. Another thing I think about too is if you are wanting to go out the door today and try it, and you haven't done that instruction before, try it with a couple of words. So think about, of your vocabulary, the 2, maybe 3 words that you really, really want students to be able to use both in spoken and written language, and try the routine with that, just 2 to 3 words, and give it a go, give it a try. But optimally, it's about that 10 minutes, I think. We don't, for sure, I know that's still a chunk of valuable instructional time, but it's not a 30 minutes, it's not a 45 minutes in terms of that instructional routine we observed. So just a note. And I just want to throw this out there. Jen Collins and I have been dialoguing in the chat a little bit together. Wouldn't it be amazing if someone was gutsy enough to videotape that instruction and come back and share the use of the vocabulary and systematic instruction that they did when we do the follow-up presentations? I think that would be so incredible. And we would all just be very supportive of your efforts and just to cheer you on for giving that a go. So think about it, following that process, using that as your focus for an intervention, and coming back maybe with a little bit of a videotape of what that looked like in your classroom we would be over the moon excited if you could do something like that. So anyway, just throwing it out there. Yeah, I agree with Jen. It's very doable. So let me bring it back, show you where we are in the context of things. And what I want you to look at is this frame. Get on the slide view here. And so taking a look, what we've done is we've covered the understanding words part of the content today for core reading strategy instruction. And now we're moving on to the understanding content side of things. So we really essentially have two chapters or two modules left. I'm going to focus the next 30 minutes-ish on main idea identification and summarizing. And then we're going to do another 30 minutes-ish on question asking and answering. And then I'll conclude with a summary of implementation and how you can take next steps with this content. So again, as we're moving into the next module or chapter, if you will, of the presentation, we're going to be thinking about main idea identification and summarizing. So you're thinking about students who have difficulty understanding the text at a basic level, meaning they're getting some of it, but maybe not putting the pieces together in its entirety. So that's the idea of linking the main idea or just in some of the details. Their comprehension is spotty. They get some things, but not others, or maybe they don't get any of it. Then we're really looking at a main idea identification issue. Hold this, so very important. If a student is over-reliant on what the text says and they cannot put it into their own words, students tend to have a main idea identification issue, right? They're just not being able to go beyond the text to succinctly identify that main idea in detail. That's key. Reminder, in their writing for main idea and summarizing, you'll see writing that doesn't have focus. Organizationally, the structure of a student's composition may not hold together. It's disorganized. If it's disorganized, it's often because there's no main idea and detail thread running through it. On the summarizing side, I told you you'll see that students really struggle to write a good introduction or write a good conclusion to their essay. And that is because they have difficulty summarizing and putting things together succinctly. Both main idea identification show up in the edit revise process in different ways. On the main idea identification side, students will be unable to locate the main idea of a peer's paper, and so they can't highlight it. They can't provide notes back to that peer. You have students who can't do that. They're unable to provide some notes back. That is a main idea identification issue. On the summarizing side, it's summarizing feedback to a peer. And so let's look at main idea identification and summarizing just a bit. And when I conclude that section, you'll have another opportunity to think about the content and think about maybe there is something in here you'd like to take out the door and apply. Understanding the content, we're going to look at main idea identification and summarizing. Starting with main idea identification first. So what is the problem that we're looking to solve is main idea identification. And we're going to look at some intervention strategies to help support those students. We're looking at this chunk of reading the text. So when I'm reading, I want students to find that main idea. I want them to be able to get it, identify it, underline it, highlight it, take notes about it, put it from the text into their own writing on some kind of form. And so what I've highlighted and read on the far left are the skills related to identifying the main idea when I'm reading. And again, we're looking at just this reading piece today as we are talking about core reading strategy instruction. Why main idea and details and summarizing are linked? It's really because they're two sides of the same coin. So on one side, I had main idea and details. That's the identification. That's like almost a receptive knowledge, receptive understanding. So I've got to be able to find that information in the text. I'm sorry, on the other side, we'll talk about summarizing as the use. So when I use and express my understanding of the gist, that is a basic level of summarizing. Because our session is core reading strategy instruction today, I wanted you to understand how main idea identification and summarizing are actual strategies. Strategies are things in reading that are built on skills, the integration of skills. So playing with the theme of the reading rope and the writing rope that you might have seen, I see skills as the braided part of that, I see strategies as the braided part of that rope, and the skills are the threads that come into that braid. And so in this case, we're looking up at main idea identification and summarizing as actual strategies. For main idea and detail identification, pre-skills in this case are literal comprehension, the ability to categorize information, and the ability to actually retell it. So hold that for a minute. If kids are struggling with main idea and detail identification, yes, I'm going to show you some things that work today as an intervention, but I'm also going to ask you to check and put a Post-it note here or a mark to come back to the slide. Students are really struggling with main idea identification. They might be having trouble with the skills that fold into it, including literal comprehension, categorizing. Just think, to understand main idea in detail, I have to sort out what is important from what is not, right? I have to differentiate a main idea from a detail. That's categorizing. Retelling, meaning that I get to say, based on whatever text structure I'm reading, I get to really take you through the whole text and tell you everything. I've got to be able to have that ability before I pull it back and tell you what the essence of the text is. So difference here, just to come back to and understand maybe where kids might be having difficulty with the skills that braid into the strategy. But why is it so important? Why is it so important for core reading instruction? It's because if you understand the main idea, it means you've figured out the most important information. You're sorting out what's important from what isn't important. And that's essential to learning. I love helping guide you about why it's important to reading and why writing. So just to review, for reading, we want students to comprehend what they read. We want them to get the main idea and just as they're reading. In their writing, this shows up as focus. It shows up as the ability to write well with a singular controlling point through your essay. I think very powerfully, if you're familiar with William Van Cleve's syntax work, main idea and detail functions completely as doer and do. When I'm looking at a passage and trying to determine its meaning, just like I would a sentence, I want to find the main doer and the main do as the main idea. So holding that parallel, if you've been doing any of the syntax work, bring it into the vocabulary and the instruction you're doing with your students in terms of comprehension. I am always looking for the doer and the do, whether I'm doing it at the sentence level or whether I'm doing it at a passage level for meaning. So just like our word understanding module, I want you to look at this through an assessment lens first, and then I'll just highlight some interventions for you. So from an assessment lens, we're going to assess through student summarizing. So I'm going to ask kids, in terms of my writing prompt this time, I'm going to ask them not just to respond to a prompt, I'm going to ask them to summarize what they've read in writing, and then I'm going to score it. So again, keeping that idea of always doing some kind of writing prompt and looking at reading through the lens of writing to get at main idea and detail identification. I know we're going to look at it through the lens of writing, summary writing. So respond, summarize what you just read, and I'm going to score it. And how I'm going to score it? You know what? Your Smarter Balanced rubric can score a narrative summary. You can use the Smarter Balanced rubric to score an informational summary. You can score it, and you can use that total score. The other thing you're able to do is look at what you're scoring for the purpose and organization domain on the Smarter Balance rubric. I know you may not see tons of growth within the short amount of time of starting an intervention, but watch that domain score. Because you're focused on main idea and detail, we're hoping that purpose, which essentially means focus, and the organization of an essay will start to improve. So on your Smarter Balance rubric, if you're using this tool for scoring, you're looking at the total score, so all 3 domains total together, and I can look at just the domain score of purpose and organization to get insight into how things are improving. The other route to take is just to use a primary trait rubric that dives deep on variables within a summary or what makes a good summary. And I've shown examples here on the screen. These are the sorts of things that you'll find in your resource packet. There's in this case, no one recommended tool. I find honestly the Smarter Balance rubric aligns just as well with a summary as it would with any form of writing. So you can dig in your choice. So we're assessing through student summarizing, right? So you're asking them not just to respond to a prompt, you're asking them to summarize the text they read. In terms of intervention, I'm going to just do some highlights here, starting with explicit and systematic instruction, moving into the materials and things for you to think about using in instruction, and then we'll end with what I call skill builders. And so one example of out the door today is, let's say you've got some of this stuff in place, but you might want to try the skill builders. That would be a perfectly good way to sort of take this content to the next level and implement it. Anyway, let's start with explicit and systematic instruction. So very much like Anita Archer did with vocabulary, your explicit and systematic instruction is intended to model and tell students what they're looking for in terms of main idea and detail. So look at the instructional language as I read it under what a teacher might say, second paragraph. So we're going to figure out the main idea of a group of sentences. There are 2 steps in thinking of a main idea. First, we name the person in the paragraph. Second, we will tell the main thing that the person did in all the sentences. Pause. For those who know William Van Cleve's work in syntax, look at this. First, we name the person in the paragraph. That's the doer. Second, we will tell the main thing that that person did in all the sentences. That's the doing. So we talk about the who or what in the paragraph, the do. We talk about the main thing the person did in all the sentence, that's the doing. It's the same thing. So what if you're doing that level of a syntax instruction and you followed his work, bring it up now. Apply it to main idea and details. Use that same instructional language. You're just bouncing it up one level of comprehension from sentence level to passage level. And then you will start to apply that with simple passages. I take what excerpt students are reading and I'll follow the same model, right? So watch and read with me in the say example. I'll come up with a sentence that tells the main idea. First, I have to name the person, and this might be the who or what. In this case, I've got just a person we'll focus on. It's easy. The sentence is all about Albert Einstein. Then I have to figure out how all the things that Albert Einstein did are related to each other. And you can think out loud and help students do it. In your slides, my instruction breaks it down further, and you can see on your own just how you can take things sentence by sentence and bounce it back up to the main idea. Essentially, you're driving explicit and instruction routine through the language you're using and how you're chunking and breaking up that text to help students find the main idea in detail. So that would be using an explicit and instruction model, very similar to what Anita Archer did, but now we're just applying it to text, to the text here. The other thing to help students identify main idea in detail, you probably use things like this, but following a simple main idea and details chart. What I love about something like this is this now gets students to write as they read. On the left-hand side of the screen is my favorite. It sort of allows you to identify sections or passages you want students to read. They then list the details from the text, and then pull those details into that main idea. And it's a way to guide note-taking and thinking step by step at a time. This, by the way, is also in your resource packet. If that's too complicated for kids, look at the right-hand side. There are ways where you can teach kids how to take details and distill them into the main idea if they're having trouble at that level. So I've got all these details, but I've got to practice figuring out what the main idea is. The chart on the far right, upper right corner is the way to do that. Similar, the one below it, we can start with a main idea sentence and let's practice the inverse. What are some of the details that we find in the text that support that? So your layout of these charts can help students visually look at how main idea and details are related. And do you see here, by helping kids sort through text like this step by step, what we're doing is making sure there aren't any gaps in their comprehension. So remember, coming into this, I said, do kids know this information fully? Are they understanding what is presented in the text? And next, a couple of things we're going to look at, highlighting and then followed by that some note-taking. If you don't have students highlighting or note-taking, these might be strategies to add to your main idea and detail identification. They pull kids into the text in a really much deeper way. So let's look at that highlighting piece here. Highlighting is the action of identifying main idea and detail. By highlighting something, I actually have to go into, maybe you make a copy of the text that the kids are reading, or you're using an e-version where I can actually highlight on that PDF, for example. But I want to teach kids that they can go in and find this stuff. And that's what highlighting does. And by comparing reading and writing again, why is it helpful to your reading, your core reading? They're going in and they're finding the main ideas by highlighting them. They're seeing how details work. They're focusing on most important information. On the writing side, they're looking at how that highlighting can be used to support note-taking, and eventually it's so critical for the edit revise process. Revise is so hard for kids because they haven't been taught to highlight and find the main idea and look at their writing from this perspective of getting into, does their writing make sense? By learning highlighting, I told you some of the stuff front loads the writing process and makes it easier for students to engage in that. And so I think you know highlighting, but it's teaching kids that they can use different symbols here, for example, to find level 1 ideas, which would be main ideas. Level 2 ideas would be details. For older students, you can even get down to a level 3 idea, really the sub details, and you could have students use different codes for those different idea levels, saying you could use a color-coded or highlighting system for them. This aligns with any kind of outline you might do. So think about helping struggling readers in this case, where you're color coding different levels of ideas on the left in the text. That translates into an outline, which then translates into something you can study from. And this is all about content engagement and thinking about your text. So again, you may, if you don't have the highlighting, outlining piece in here, it might be something to add. We could do something like this with Harriet Tubman. So for example, what I could do is I could take a text that kids are reading and I could separate that text into individual sentences. And then what I would do is I would model how to find the main idea and highlight that in the sentence and have kids practice with me. If we need to do another couple examples together, we can, and then some on their own. But one of the things that really helps students is not see it in a full paragraph. So you might do the work to separate it and to do some highlighting sentence by sentence. Another way to look at this is through the lens of, I now did the sentence by sentence. I have, in this case, I need to digest or work through what I need to write about. So teaching students to read read their prompts and highlight important words has that extension to writing as well. And so if this is my prompt, a wide array of video games are promoting violence, celebrating blood and gore, and celebrating death are available for purchase in stores around the world. Some research has indicated that violent video games promote violence against their players by desensitizing youth to blood, death. And do you think violent video games increase violence in their users? Be prepared to provide specific reasoning to support your assertion. So by highlighting important words, video games are promoting violence, and is that something I agree with? I can come in here and do the highlighting that would bring that forward to students. Anyway, think here about if you haven't been teaching highlighting and outlining, is that something you can abuse? Just for a minute and just for noting. So let me conclude here with the note-taking piece. So having kids write as they read, essentially. And they can write as they read. Note-taking is a thinking process. It's the studying through the process of writing. You can have kids copy notes from a board. They often need to take notes during a lab or while they're watching a movie. They're taking notes from a text to use in their writing, but that note-taking part as I'm reading is so key. It's reinforcing to me what the text says, and I start to learn to put things in my own words. That's why note-taking is important. And where kids get into the track of plagiarizing, it's that they don't know how to take notes from a text. They haven't practiced taking notes and putting things in their own words. For writing, why this is so important is you need note-taking to plan and organize your writing. That's all note-taking. Note-taking is also used in the edit and revise process, right? To provide feedback to peers. So you see it's so important to do while you're reading because you're front loading it for writing as well. I'm not going to show you all these note-taking strategies. There's several. You can take simple notes. You can use your main idea and details charts that I showed you earlier. You can use a top-down topic web. You can also use something more complicated. The old school Cornell note-taking format works very well too. So just to show you, I want to land on this. This is just a simple table to help students extract what the text says. And then you practice translating that in their own words. So if the text means this, I say this. And you practice it, right? And you don't have to do it in sentence form. What the text says, what I can interpret in terms of meaning, modeling that. And here's a more instructional example, right? You can highlight chunks of that text and then take notes, putting the main idea in your own words here. Top-down topic webs is a Jones-Sedita strategy who has given permission to us to share in our work in Patton. So this is just another idea of note-taking. What I love about this is it correlates, if you're doing a good job there, color coding your highlighting, it just comes down to putting that into a visual format. So some ideas. I'm going to conclude with skill builders and then give you some, I will do a breakout group here, breakout room. We're going to get ready for a breakout room for you to think about some of this main idea and detail content. So that's coming just as I finish the skill builders. So skill builders, in my head, in terms of intervention, these are things that just tighten up, give additional practice and reinforcement to students who need practice in this area. And so there's a few listed there, including title matching, headline matching. You might be familiar with 3-2-1. I love title matching. Title matching is essentially, I have these main idea titles, and I can take a title and match it to a passage with an unidentified title. Titles are main ideas. If I pay attention to titles, I pay attention to main ideas. So we could do some matching like that. Main idea and detail matching. I can take sentence strips. I can cut up a text and I have a title and I can sort what goes with what title and what goes with the title and what doesn't go with the title. So another way to practice this skill. Finally, you can write titles. So if I give students a passage, ask them to write the title, you're asking them to come up with the main idea. You can play a variety of things in the news editor realm. So writing headlines for articles, for example. I can use the mantra who, what, where, when, why, and how to come up with a main idea and detail title. And in this case, I'm doing the reverse, right? These are just headlines. It's the same thing as titles. We're just doing it within the context of a main idea and details. So it's your implementation look-fors here are use of some kind of curriculum-based or mastery assessment to monitor, explicit instruction to teach the strategy, seeing that students are using that to write about the text they read, some kind of skill builder might be used for reinforcement, and just lots of opportunities to write. And that's what we've got. Oops, sorry, let me go back to my PowerPoint view and we'll set you up for that breakout. And so here, let's say this is your intervention plan, right? And you wanted to go into the main idea identification realm. What you will do is you'll look in the far left and say, okay, well, what did I see here that I can use to enhance the instruction that I'm already implementing? Can I add more explicitness to it? If so, your intervention might be using that explicit instruction language that I showed you. If you're not using any kind of main idea or details chart to visualize and show how main idea and details work, that's something to take out the door and infuse. The highlighting and note-taking piece is so important for reading, but it's why kids fall down in the writing process and edit revise. So that could be a fun thing to add. And then any skill builders too. You're picking your intervention from there. You're beginning it in November after our session, continuing your implementation in December and January. You have implementation look-fors that you can use just to guide that instructional implementation. And then we talked about just the way we're going to get at this main idea and detail identification is through your summary writing. So basically getting the routine moving forward is getting students to write a summary based on what they read. And you're going to be scoring that total score, looking at the focus score, or if you're using smarter balance, that would be your organization purpose domain. You're welcome to explore the primary writing charts that I've shared as well. So let me get you ready here for a breakout group. It's the same idea as before. I want you to think about that module, that strand of content, main idea identification, and the students that might struggle in this area. They have spotty comprehension. They're not getting the basic gist when they communicate meaning of text. And so your writing is unfocused. Those are the kids we're looking at here. What from that content can you think about using out the door? What assessment procedures related to summarizing can you put in place? Essentially, application. How can you use what we've talked about in that section to move forward? So again, let's do a 7-minute breakout, and we'll move forward. Thanks, everybody. Same process. Yeah, thanks everybody for coming back here, returning, and for your thinking about that application related to main idea and detail identification. That's the hard work that you do for students who aren't grasping meaning from text, who aren't getting the gist or have incomplete understanding of how what they're reading, of the information that they're reading. So I welcome any comments in the chat that can help convey the gist of your conversations during those breakout meetings. Any observations or things that you focused in on in your conversation, I'd love to know. You're welcome to include those in the chat. And as you do, please, yeah, you're welcome to share. I'm going to move on and just highlight a little bit about the highlight a little bit about summarizing. I'm going to summarizing, and then conclude in that final piece of, I know some of you indicated that getting kids to elaborate and expand content and connect to evidence was a key need. And so I don't want to leave without touching base on that. And thank you for those of you who are sharing. Really appreciate knowing the highlights from your conversations. So let's go in and look at summarizing. I'm going to summarize summarizing here. Summarizing, we are really looking at what we've been talking about with main idea and detail here, But the idea of summarizing in this case is meaning we want kids to put this in writing. We want kids to express it verbally. Main idea, a detail identification is more on the receptive side of things. And now summarizing is the expression of it and the use. When I'm reading the text and I have on this side, write a summary, how do I differentiate that from the middle box on this screen? When I mean write a summary of the text as I'm reading, I mean write the gist, write a short statement, summarize in a word, summarize in 2 to 3 sentences. When I'm writing about the text and I write a proper summary, I want the beginning, middle, and end. I want the main idea introduced in as the topic sentence. I want the ideas organized. Writing about the text in the middle box is the written summary I think we think of as the formal summarizing, right? Formal summarizing. It's essentially what I want kids to do as part of the assessment process here that we've been talking about. But anyway, know that summarizing is that strategy. It is the fully braided rope. The skills that lead into summarizing are these. And these are just things to pay attention to as you're working with students who might have difficulty expressing, in this case, expressing their understanding of the main idea. You need literal comprehension to be able to summarize, because summarize is essentially you're pulling information together, threading it together. It's inference-like. You need to be able to retell. You need to be able to understand and identify the main idea, sequence content, right? Good summaries have an organization to them. That's why I cued you in and said, kids aren't organized about how they convey comprehension. It sort of points you here to summarizing. The categorizing, again, is something I need to express topic versus details. That's main idea and detail. I need that text structure. Both summarizing and retelling are conveying an understanding of students' knowledge of text structure. And finally, to summarize, I've got to be good at my sentence writing. So relying on that syntax work, some of you know from William Van Cleve that understanding and ability to write good sentences. But why is summarizing so important? If you can do it, you really know it. You really know it. In fact, summarizing has some of the highest effects in our research and some of the work I alluded to just as we began this section. So why reading? When I want kids to read and understand what they read and get the gist, that's where summarizing is so key. Why writing? Summarizing supports writing about the text. If I come in with a good summary into my writing process, then I'm really set up to do my work. Summarizing is used in edit and revise to convey what I need to respond to or change in my writing. And another clue, if kids have trouble writing introductions and conclusions, or the beginnings and ends, right? The beginning intro or in the wrap up, they probably have difficulty with summarization. So if you're seeing that, they need help practicing writing summaries in isolation, come back in and work on those introductions and conclusions and put everything together. Same assessment process as main idea and detail identification, asking kids to write a summary about what they read and scoring it with your analytic rubric. In this case here, what's going to change is you will be using your organization and purpose domain score to keep track of what kids are writing. All right. Oh, sorry, no, you're still using the same domain score. I apologize for that. Anyway, let me look at a couple quick things with you. Build on the summary charts that you might be using in main idea and details. So essentially summaries are the big picture. So you're asking kids what your main ideas equal. That's your summary. So I'm reading multiple passages here. I'm coming up with a main idea for each. The summary is my distilled main ideas. I'm bringing those main ideas together in a summary. So you could have a summary chart that parallels your main idea and detail chart that looks something like this. So it's again, it's the idea of putting it visual. Using a frame So if you're just trying to get kids to take some notes from a main idea and detail start, using a summary frame also fits within this category. I'm going to skip just statement for the sake of time, but you've got that information in there. That's just another process of helping kids pull out some of the main idea and detail information in summary form. I love the summary prompt cards because they are your bridge between reading and writing. If I use the summarization prompt card to look at my notes, right, what comes on my main idea and detail chart or a statement I make about the text, I'm asking, does my summary give only important information and key ideas? Is it brief? Does it tell the main idea? Having this checklist can be used for both reading and writing text. The same as my next example here. You're able to come back to them. One is a little bit more simple. The other gives you something you can use across paragraphs. Again, for both reading and writing. For skill builders, I'm not going to present these, but I will tell you about them right here. Skill builders, ask students to write a one-word sentence or a one-sentence summary. So pick, like we just read about Harriet Tubman. What's one word that describes what we just read? Powerful. Find a great vocabulary word that describes what we read. Or your turn, just write a one-sentence summary, or if it's hard, you could say 2 words or 3. A magnet word is essentially a one-word summary. What's that one word that sticks, that makes a difference? And just the difference between a one-word summary and a magnet word is the terminology. Applying 5 W's plus H, this bridges into questioning, which we're going to talk about just a moment, but asking students to answer the 5 W plus H questions to create that summary. And finally, I'll skip to somebody wanted but no. It's just a really cute way to sum up with words and in a simple sentence. So it always works. Somebody wanted but no applied to text. So while Wile E. Coyote wanted to eat the road runner, but the road runner outsmarted him, he never got his meal and was chased into the sunset. So for example, I'm reading the book A Fine Balance. I could say somebody, the character Dina, wanted to live on her own, but she had to move in with her brother so she could save money, right? So we've got a structure here that's kind of fun to play with and would just be a fun way to make a twist on summarizing with kids. It's a skill builder, right? Skill builders are ways to enhance your instruction. All righty. So thinking a little bit about that, I wanted to conclude with this example. One of the things I told you kids need to do when they're working in the main idea and summarizing realm is putting things in their own words. That demonstrates their understanding. And what happens is you're working with kids who are trained to copy from text, or they are just taking the text. One thing you can do is do text sorts. So you can show kids an example of the original text. You can have a couple examples of how kids did well summarizing in their own words, and then versions of the text that are quote copied or have copied excerpts or too closely aligned with the text to make them really in your own words. And essentially what I can do is read the original text excerpt with kids, read the examples down below, and tell and sort which ones are best in their own words, which ones are closely copied, why are they that way? And so you're able to use that as a strategy to sort. So just an example there. Our look-fors are the same. So when we come to the implementation plan for summarizing, it is the same as main idea and detail identification because they're the two sides of the same coin. So you're choosing some intervention strategy, beginning that intervention as you leave, continuing it and coming back to share. The implementation look-for is the same, assessment the same. We're going to get at this through students' ability to summarize. So there we go. A great resource, if you haven't found this text, is The Writing Revolution. There's fabulous information in here about summarizing that takes it kind of to a level that you might want to pull for a teacher study group or professional learning community, would really complement the section that we just had. All right, let me get to the question asking and answering bit, and then I'm going to sum up the day or morning. So we're still understanding content. Building into our last quadrant on the understanding words versus understanding content diagram. And this is where I want to conclude, because this is the piece where students can fall apart when you see things like they can't connect what's in the text with, where's the supporting evidence, right? Citing evidence, citing examples from the text. That, believe it or not, is all driven by question asking and answering. And I know citing evidence is such a key piece of what we do with text-dependent analysis and more advanced forms of writing that demonstrate student understanding at the secondary level. It comes down to a deep understanding of how to ask and answer and ask questions. And I'll show you how that all connects. So we're now looking still in that reading the text piece, but the far left spans across everything. As I'm reading text, I want to ask myself things. Do I know what the words mean? Do I understand the text? Where's the main idea? Where's the detail? I want to be asking questions. I want to know how to answer questions. By prompting, if we have a dialogue and I'm asking you questions, we expand our ideas. We expand them and connect additional pieces of information. And so that's really why this is so important. It's the foundation for inquiry. And that is really where discipline-specific work at the secondary level heads. It's about this question asking and answering and inquiry. Why reading? Question asking and answering helps students understand the text. It's helping them connect ideas, helping them expand ideas. And why writing? If I can ask myself some questions and answer them, I'm supporting idea generation. One question leads to an answer, to another question, to an answer. It helps me generate text when writing. It helps me connect ideas. It helps build an internal author's voice. And questions can be used to support finding the evidence, which is something kids need to practice, right? And get into their writing, as we know. So this is my last and final piece to fill in for writing instruction. From an assessment perspective, let's start here. Maze can come up again as something. You can certainly do a passage reading with comprehension questions. See how kids are answering and responding to those questions. Are they getting them in, answering those correctly? On the writing side of things, you can look at a writing sample, and this could be responding to any kind of prompt. Again, any kind of prompt, doesn't have to be a summary, it could be any kind of prompt. Here's where you could score it with a total score. In this case, what differentiates this question and asking and answering from what we talked about with main idea and detail summarizing is using a development or elaboration domain instead. And I also will be sharing some primary trait rubrics that align with questioning that you can consider using as well. So here's that evidence and elaboration score on the Smarter Balanced Array, and I'll show you these. These are some rubrics that you can use to evaluate student questions. So I'll show you these in context in just a minute. In terms of intervention, the primary, and I think I researched intervention strategy is the use of something called question asking relationships, question answer relationships. Essentially, that means that you're teaching students how questions work. So I have a question. I write my question in that top box. I need to determine to answer that question. Is it an in the book question? Meaning, will I find the answer right there in the book? I can underline it, highlight it, connect it back to that, highlight it, get that information right in one spot in the book. Or is it in the book? I'll find that answer, but it might be in paragraph 1 on page 30, and it might be in paragraph 3 on page 32. That would be think and search. Still right there in the book, but I've got to find and get the information together in a couple places. So I'm analyzing that question, and then I need to understand if it's in the book, right in one spot, or I'm thinking and searching to find it. On the other side of things, looking at that question that I have in my box, right, the one that I'm analyzing, is it an in my head type of question? That in my head type of question requires inferencing. It means that I have to look at the text, which is the author who wrote it, or you could say the text in you or author in you. And then I need to put a little bit of my own understanding to that question to be able to answer it. So it's both in the book, the author, but I gotta add something to it. And then finally, I can look at a question. Do you like pizza? Might be my question. And I don't need to read anything to answer that. And so that's your far left box on my own. So essentially, this provides the framing for instruction that you can use to introduce how to understand questions and how they work. You can practice with a question, show students the different ways that they work. If you really need to scaffold instruction, you can just start on the in the book side with in the book type questions, and then add an understanding and add and expand to in my head and on my, in my head on that side of the equation. You can introduce pieces of this slowly for some learners. The idea is I want to identify how questions work. The other piece, I want students to learn how to write their own questions. I want students, after they learn how this works, how to write a write their question, how to write a think and search question, how to write an author and you question, how to write an on my own question. When students can write their own questions, you're on the way to helping them build that voice of being able to prompt and expand content and connection. So I have examples here. I'll quickly go through these answers right there in the book. The words are used to make up the question, and the answer usually is the same. I have a sample question and I have a sample answer. So my right there, think and search slides, you could take from me and put them into your instruction. So you can use these as, just take them out the door and use these as examples, and you can make your own and add to these slides. But the author in you just gives you some different ways so you can understand how these questions are working. And there are different ways to visualize it. Here is just a grid version, right? Grid version where you can have kids play with these questions. And so one of the things I might do then once I've done this instruction is ask kids to write questions for this passage. So your homework assignment or your practice assignment to see if you know this is to write their question, an author and you question, and on my own question. We're going to come back and I'm going to mix up your questions and we're going to play Jeopardy, or I'm going to mix up your questions and I'm going to pass out 3 to this group, pass out another 3 to this group, and have those groups try to respond to them. There's so many different ways you can reinforce it. But it is so key because students learn to ask and answer questions. They're learning to write their own questions. This is the foundation of inquiry-based learning. It's the foundation of things that you can use to support main idea and detail instruction. And so I wanted to show you, you can take something like I share here, this rubric, and actually give kids some scores based on the type of questions they are asking and answering. So here's an example. The students accurately identify each of the 4 question types. The students demonstrate close, careful reading. They're making appropriate links to the text in their make the book questions. So you kind of get an idea there of how you might use that. Another QAR aligned rubric based on looking at student answers to QAR type questions. This kind of thing is available, QAR instruction. There's a great theory to practice book by Scholastic you can obtain. Also, there are lessons for QAR for grades 6 through 8 already compiled by Scholastic and available. There's lots of information on QAR on the web as well. So I have a site here where you can find some free additional resources to support that strategy use. Yeah, and then finally, in terms of skill builders, I just want to show you that connection to where's the evidence and why questions connect. So just take a look on the left-hand side of the screen. So in this case, I'm using question and answer to help kids get into the text. This is where they're finding the evidence. So if I say, okay, write a QAR question, then find its answer, list the page number. This is a teaching citation. List the page number where you found the answer. and then highlight the words in the text that help you answer that question. We are now starting to see how students can be taught to cite evidence, right? So you're using what's called a where's the evidence log here. This is more of a skill builder once you've taught that QAR strategy. Questions here, answers, and you're citing the text. On the right-hand side, I just wanted to point out, predictions, predict and prove, predict and prove. Predictions are also a way for students to learn to cite evidence. Predictions are based on a question. What is your prediction, right? What is your prediction? And then stating that prediction and then reading the next set of text to determine if their prediction was true. The next set of text, what's your next prediction? And that's listed on the right-hand side. Sort of works similarly, but can be applied to maybe more fiction text. You're basically connecting that whole question, asking and answering to the text. Our implementation look-fors are the same though, having kids write about the text they read and looking at those skill builders. So your intervention plan here is the QAR strategy and maybe one of the skill builders to reinforce or expand it. Starting again after our webinar today in November, implementing December, January, continuing that implementation. You have the implementation look-fors. And then finally, you've got the assessment. Assessment's a little different this time, right? You've got some choices of whether you're coming at this through reading, using that maze, using some kind of passage reading. Sometimes oral reading fluency has students then wait and respond to comprehension questions. So that would be a way to go. You could look at student writing to a prompt, analytic rubric. And in this case, you're scoring the development elaboration domain because we're looking at connecting ideas. Question asking contributes to that. And then finally, I shared some primary trait rubrics that can be applied to how students are reading or writing. So it's sort of a mixed domain there. Some materials, I think something like a project reads framing your thoughts is well aligned with this question asking and answering work that we just did. And so that was just one I had thought about. And so have sort of circled that in there, circled things that more get at this more deeper meaning. If you really are looking for a substantive meaning level intervention, we've got third quest listed, a read to achieve. Some of these others really starry, get at deeper meaning. All right, I'm going to do implementation and then pause at the end to see if you have any questions about pulling this all together. So we've talked about content engagement today. So the whole idea was to get kids engaged with what they read, to think about print, to think about what they're thinking, to really build their understanding. We focused on the far right of this chart today, where we're using core reading strategies to read about the text. We're reading to understand the words, which means I need to read them and I need to understand them. And then we've got main idea and detail and summarizing. And we talked about summarizing, not in the formal sense of summarizing, but getting kids to be able to write a sentence summary or a 2-sentence summary, a gist summary. This is your map to figuring out where I might head with this work. And you gave me those clues at the start. Some of you said understanding words was an idea, was a need. And so maybe you will take out the door the vocabulary, explicit and instruction strategy, or really dig into multisyllabic words and reading word parts and understanding morphemes. A main idea and detailed identification, work with summarizing. And that's for students who have trouble understanding the whole or the basic gist of that text. They're missing pieces. When they're writing, their writing is not focused, it's disorganized, doesn't have a controlling point. And then finally, on the right-hand side, we're talking about question and asking and answering in the core as the way to generate ideas, connect ideas, pull it together. It's your underlying inquiry that's so important for disciplinary learning. So I showed you 4 different implementation plans to go with those 4 areas of need. And these are what implementation plan for understanding words. You'll need one of those implementation look-fors, the implementation plan for main idea identification, summarizing, question asking and answering. These just guide whatever pathway of those 4 you're picking. So let me conclude by giving you a preview here of your implementation presentation and what the components of that look like, because we would so love you to come back and just share some little piece of what I shared today. So you will be returning, if you choose to share and report back on, did it work? Did it work? You're going to try to do it and do it well, and did it work? So here's the presentation template. I have this embedded in my larger PowerPoint, but I also have it available to you as a separate presentation. And so you can find it as an individual PowerPoint file, and you can just embed and update the information to build your story, your presentation. So the first part is we love to know who you are, so you can introduce your team. Something a little bit interesting about your school, sharing demographics, what your school's like. Now I want to know the problem. That larger chart is the problem you were looking at about understanding the words. Was it about understanding the content? And within, where did you focus? So just what was the problem you focused on from the session? You're going to talk about what you're going to do, what you did. And you're going to identify and describe your intervention, show instructional examples, maybe show a video. And so just a reminder, you had all these choices of intervention plans based on the area of need. So you wouldn't report on all of this by any scope. It would be what in the understanding words intervention did you do, or what in the main idea identification area did you do, or what in summarizing, or what in question asking and answering. So tell us what you did. It's about describing your intervention, showing instructional examples. The do it and do it well piece is just bring in the fidelity checklist and reflect on it and what went well, what didn't go as well. That allows us to try to problem solve and talk in details, fun ways about instruction. So just share how it went. That's your report back on how it went. What went well, what didn't go well. Finally, share a data table. So I've got all these data tables aligned with the content. Use that data table, fill it in. You can say an NA. I didn't administer this like reading assessment, but I did give a writing prompt, and I did score it with the analytic rubric and what my scores were. You'll notice we've got spots for one time point in November, December, and then another time point in December, January, keeping in mind holidays and such. If you can take that data and put it into some visual, simple line graph, be wonderful. And share any student writing samples, for example, how writing might have improved. Did students use more sophisticated vocabulary words? We could look at that. And then what you're going to do next, and where are you going with it, and how things will head. So a basic presentation there to review content. So I want to make sure Patton wraps things up. I also want to make sure you can stay on a little bit and ask some questions. You're welcome to put questions in the chat box from the session today. But I will look forward to seeing you on January 11th at 8:30 for our part 2. Again, expectation is coming in with a team presentation and a willingness to be on camera, talk about the content, very different from this very traditional webinar today. It'll be interactive and we'll discuss it all. All right, I appreciate your time. I want to make sure Patton has a few moments to wrap it up. So I will turn it over to my Patton colleagues to say final words about next steps.
Well,
thanks everybody.
Lena. Thank you so much for sharing all those secondary core reading strategies, excuse me, instructional tools, and like really walking us through the next steps.